good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Declaration celebration this year, 2020. We always said that we were going to have a rain or shine in honor of Caesar Rodney, who rode through a thunderstorm to sign the Declaration, but we're always glad when it's not raining. So, those of you joining us by Facebook too, we're glad that you're with us. We usually start with a prayer. Sometimes it's been the prayer that was prayed at the Continental Congress, and sometimes George Washington's prayer. And critics say that religious people of this day are making those things up, and it wasn't really true. So I thought I'd start with a prayer that our United States Senate chaplain, Barry Black, he just prayed this prayer a couple of months ago down in the Senate, and it's applicable to us today. He said, "Eternal Lord God, you have summarized ethical behavior in a single sentence. Do for others what you would have them do for you. Remind our senators and ourselves that they alone are accountable to you for their conduct. Lord, help them to remember that they cannot ignore you and get away with it, for we always reap what we sow. Have your way, mighty God. You are the potter, our senators, and we are the clay. Mold us and make us after your will. Stand up, omnipotent God. Stretch yourself and let this nation and world know that you alone are sovereign. And I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen." That's our United States Senate chaplain. And if you've been with us before, you know that Francis Scott Key wrote the Star Spangled Banner during the War of 1812 on September 13th, 1814, while the British were bombarding Fort McHenry in the Baltimore Harbor. But recently we came across a letter that he wrote to a friend, John Randolph, and these are some of his words describing that event. He says, "You will be surprised to hear that I have spent 11 days in the British fleet. I went with a flag to endeavor to save poor old Dr. Bean's a voyage to Halifax, in which we fortunately succeeded. They detained us until after the attack on Baltimore, and as you might imagine, what a state of anxiety I endured. To make my feelings still more acute, the Admiral had intimated his fears that the town must be burned, and I was sure that if taken, it would have been given up to plunder. It was filled with women and children, and I hope I shall never cease to feel the warmest gratitude when I think of this most merciful deliverance. It seems to have given me a higher idea of the forbearance and tender mercy of God than I ever had before." Between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, the British, with 1 or 2 rocket and several bomb vessels manned by 1,200 men, attempted under the cover of darkness to slip past the fort, hoping to effect a landing and attack the garrison in the rear. A fierce battle ensued. Fort McHenry opened up the full force of all her batteries upon them as they repassed, and the fleet, responding with entire broadsides, made an explosion so terrific that it seemed as though earth had opened up and was vomiting shot and shell in a sheet of fire and brimstone. The heavens aglow were a seething sea of flame, and the waters of the harbor lashed into an angry sea by the vibrations. And the Minden rode and tossed as though in a tempest. It is recorded that the houses in the city of Baltimore, 2 miles distant, were shaken to their foundations. Above the tempestuous roar, intermingled with its hubbub and confusion, we heard the shrieks and groans of the dying and wounded. But alas, they were from the direction of the fort. What did it mean? For over an hour the pandemonium reigned. Suddenly it ceased. All was quiet, not a shot fired or a sound heard. A death-like stillness prevailed as the darkness of night resumed its sway. The awful stillness and suspense were unbearable. I turned my eyes in the direction of the fort and its flag, but the darkness had given way given place to a heavy fog of smoke in the now enveloped harbor, and hung close down to the surface of the water. Some time must yet elapse before anything definite might be ascertained. At last it came. A bright streak of gold mingled with crimson shot athwart the eastern sky, followed by another and still another as the morning sun rose in the fullness of his glory, lifting the mist of the deep and crowning a heaven-blessed land with new victory and grandeur. And with great emotion, as you can imagine, he scribbled the words onto the back of an envelope that he had in his pocket. And within a short period of time, it was scattered throughout the whole nation at that time and sung by a military band. And so hopefully you have the words. There's actually 4 verses written to the Star Spangled Banner, but we usually sing the first and the fourth, and so hopefully you have a little piece of paper. Some people say it's a difficult song to sing, but we disagree, right? So let's stand and sing the Star Spangled Banner. Desolation, victory and peace. May the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Amen. So you can even sing it when the power goes out. That's great. So terrific. And so we're always pleased and honored to have the Chief Drife, the Chief of the Cheshire Police, to come and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So thank you, Chief.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
There was a committee of 5 that was put together to draft the Declaration of Independence, and so now there's going to be some selections to tell us about that committee of 5.
In the mid-1700s, colonial life was well established. There were governors appointed by the King of England, and each colony had its own colonial legislature with representatives elected from the colony itself. Breaking ties with their motherland and setting up a new form of government was the furthest thing from their minds. But over the course of 20 years, a series of events goaded the colonists into action. These events violated the colonists' rights as Englishmen and also violated their God-given rights of self-government and representation. As dawn gave way to early morning sunshine on April 19, 1775, a volley on the green of Lexington, Massachusetts, began a war that would last 6 years and would change the course of America forever. During the first 9 months of the war, the Americans were fighting for their rights as English subjects, forced into a posture of defense by the overbearing weight of the British troops stationed among them. But in January of 1776, the King's answer to their carefully drafted petition for justice arrived, calling for more troops to put down the rebellion in America. In Philadelphia, the debate over whether or not to declare independence raged for weeks at the Second Continental Congress. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee from Virginia introduced a resolution to Congress that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. 4 days later, before voting on Lee's resolution, a committee of 5 was appointed to draft a declaration embodying that resolution. The 5 men selected were Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, and Thomas Jefferson. This morning, we're going to take a look at the lives of each of these men.
All right. First is Benjamin Franklin. At the age of 70, he was known for his diplomacy and wisdom in approaching complicated issues. His sage half-smile belied years of pluck and grit, fueled by a sparking independent mind and temper. He had traded his birthplace of Boston for the equally busy Philadelphia, coming there on foot at the age of 17. His skill in printing helped him find work, and later, after a job offer in the mercantile business fell through, Ben set up his own printing business with a partner. Along with earning a living, he earned the reputation of being an honest and fair man. In the following years, Ben studied and learned 5 languages. He began writing his famous Poor Richard's Almanac. Here we go. Started a literary club collecting books that later became the beginnings of the Philadelphia Library. He became involved in politics, elected to the General Assembly for 10 consecutive years. It was during this time that Ben made his discoveries about electricity. His involvement in government grew. He was appointed as a commissioner to make a treaty with the Indians and served as a delegate to a convention consulting on defense and security against the French. Later, several colonies sent Ben to England to represent and lobby for them in Parliament. His efforts delayed the eruption between England and her American colonies, but at last, convinced that war was inevitable, he returned to America. Pennsylvania sent him as a delegate to the Continental Congress, where the topic of independence was thoroughly debated behind closed doors. The decision they made in Congress was not a light one. Each man voting for independence would be marked as a traitor to the British government and, if captured, would be hung. When the men gathered to put their signature on the Declaration of Independence, Ben lightened the moment for them all, saying, "Gentlemen, we must hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." Throughout the War for Independence, Ben Franklin continued to serve his country as a minister to France. There, he helped draft the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war in 1783. 4 years later, he helped frame the Constitution of the United States in America. His signature can be found on both of these documents. Later, after the war, when the Continental Congress convened again to reconstruct their form of government and create a national constitution, Benjamin Franklin once again sat in the large, stuffy room, listening to the heated discussions among the 55 delegates. His hairs were silvered now. He sat as the oldest among them, absorbing the points and counterpoints in his practical way. Finally, he rose and addressed the president of the convention, General George Washington. He pointed out that they had not progressed very far in the 4 or 5 weeks that they had spent in this room. The differing views on almost every question was, in his mind, a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. In this situation of this assembly, he continued, groping as it were in the darkness to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when it is presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illumine our understanding? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little, partial, local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a byword and a reproach down to future ages. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter, from this unfortunate instance, despair of establishing governments by human wisdom, and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. Therefore, I beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. Benjamin Franklin's request that morning is an equally important reminder for us today. He had seen firsthand in his diplomatic travels between America and France the thinking behind the revolution on our shore and the revolution that would soon break out in the streets of Paris. The French threw their arms around the philosophy of the Enlightenment. Human beings are a law unto themselves, independent of God. The only authority left is the authority of the human mind. Ben Franklin knew that the American Revolution, in stark contrast, was rooted in Scripture, with a realistic grasp of man's tendency to sin and of the need for mutual trust and accountability under the authority of God. Benjamin Franklin pointed out perhaps the most important part of the American mindset when he reminded his fellow delegates that success would not be found in the efforts of human wisdom, but in humbly admitting their limitations and imploring God for divine wisdom and guidance. Through the centuries, that truth remains the same. It is when we place our hope in God rather than man that we find true liberty and justice for all.
John Adams had a long family history of fighting for freedom and liberty. On his father's side, his ancestor, Henry Adams, fled from England under the reign of Charles I. On his mother's side, he was a descendant of John Alden, who sailed across the Atlantic on the Mayflower, landing at Plymouth Rock in 1620. For as long as he could remember, John Adams called the Massachusetts colony his home. He attended school in Braintree, followed by Harvard University, and studied law with a well-known barrister in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Attorney General in Worcester struck up a friendship with John and generously offered to let him use his extensive library for free. John became a successful lawyer in Braintree and became involved in politics shortly after. In 1765, when the Stamp Act stirred up a hornet's nest in the colonies, John wrote and published an essay that garnered instant respect and popularity. But John Adams was not selective in his aim for justice and truth. When frightened British soldiers fired into a crowd in the streets of Boston and killed 5 men, an act that became known as the Boston Massacre, John Adams took on the difficult task of defending them in court. His decision thrust him between public anger and justice, but John Adams rose to the challenge and successfully defended his client. His patriotism was too well known and respected for the people to distrust him. Within a short time after the incident, they elected John to represent them at the First Continental Congress in 1774, and again the following 2 years. The fact that he was appointed to the Committee of Five to draft the Declaration of Independence shows that no one in that room doubted either his zeal for his country or his discernment. In the years that followed, John Adams traveled to France and Great Britain to represent the colonies, negotiating treaties for peace and commerce. When George Washington was elected president, John Adams' name was right alongside his on the ticket. He served as the first vice president with the same dedication and energy he always expended for the sake of his country. 8 years later, John Adams was elected to the office of President of the United States of America. It seems appropriate that John Adams breathed his last breath on the 50th anniversary of that eventful day when Congress gave their hearty approval and cast a vote in favor of the Declaration of Independence. It was a day that he carried with him through his entire life, and a day that he declared will always be celebrated by succeeding generations. The next person on the Committee of Five we're going to look at is Robert Livingston. He never signed the Declaration of Independence, even though he was on the committee commissioned to draft it. But no one ever gave the reason behind his decision, so it will always be a mystery. Robert Livingston was born in New York. He could trace his ancestry back to James Livingston, the regent of Scotland in the 16th century, who ruled during the years of James I's childhood. Robert was directly descended from an earl who served as governor of Linlithgow Castle, the same castle where Mary, Queen of Scots, was born. Robert's great-great-grandfather emigrated to America in 1678, obtaining a patent for the Manor of Livingston on the Hudson River in Columbia County, New York. He joined forces with King William and others to fit an expedition against the pirates that infested the American coast at the time. But their agent, Captain Kidd, turned out to be a worse pirate than the pirates he had been sent out to conquer. Robert Livingston grew up in the city of New York and pursued an interest in law. He graduated from college at the age of 17, studied under a respected barrister, and obtained a license as attorney and counselor, and not long after was appointed the recorder of the city of New York. His job there didn't last long. Both Robert and his father were strong patriots, and because of their support of the rebels, Robert was expelled from office. In 1775, he was sent to the Continental Congress as a delegate from New York and was re-elected the following year. Although he did not sign the Declaration, Robert Livingston continued to serve his country and home state in Congress and in the New York legislature. He later served as the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and Chancellor of the state of New York. In 1789, when the city of New York decked itself for the inauguration of General George Washington, Chancellor Livingston had the great honor of administering the oath of office to the first President of the United States of America. Under the Jefferson administration several years later, Robert was appointed minister to the court of France and successfully negotiated with the ministers of Napoleon Bonaparte for the purchase of Louisiana. During his lifetime, he contributed to the fine arts of America as well as science. During his tenure in Europe, he purchased fine paintings and vases, which he sent to the American Academy of Fine Arts in New York. He also contributed to and encouraged Robert Fulton's steamboat experiments, and also he studied agriculture and introduced gypsum manure and clover grass. His writings were described as chaste and classical. Ben Franklin dubbed him the Cicero of America. Robert Livingston continued to pour himself into the interests of his country until his death in 1813 at the age of 66.
Roger Sherman spent his boyhood days on a small farm in Stonington, Connecticut. His father died in 1741, thrusting Roger into the role of supporting his family. He left his apprenticeship to a local shoemaker and took charge of the family farm. After a few years, he sold the farm and moved the family to New Milford. Roger worked hard as a shoemaker in New Milford and threw himself into study with equal energy. He would read any book he could lay his hands on, and when he became interested in law, he borrowed books on jurisprudence, learning as much as he could. He never studied under a barrister or had a teacher. He had only the books he borrowed, but he became one of the most talented lawyers of his day. Roger Sherman is the only man in American history to sign all 4 founding documents. He not only signed them, but he helped create them as well. John Adams called him one of the strongest pillars of the Revolution. In addition to serving in Congress during the war, he also served on the Committee of Safety in Connecticut. He was a delegate to the convention that framed the United States Constitution, and he helped ratify that document in Connecticut. He also served as a U.S. representative and later senator in Congress, as well as taking on the role of mayor of New Haven. In a speech to the Sons of the American Revolution, Cheshire veteran John White said this of Roger Sherman: "For prudence, discretion, and sound logic, he was unrivaled. His capacity was equal to every emergency. Strong common sense, integrity, and faithful service marked his whole career. A plain-spoken, plain-dressed Puritan, his private character was as pure as his public career was illustrious. He was well regarded for his piety and charity. Thomas Jefferson described him as a man who never said a foolish thing in his life. And John Adams said he was one of the most sensible men in the world."
And the last gentleman on the Committee of 5 was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia was an easy choice for the Committee of 5. He had a natural way with words and actively wrote on the issues of his day. His father, Peter Jefferson, died when Thomas was 14 years old, leaving behind a beautiful Virginian estate to his wife and 8 children. The lands, which he called Monticello, were left to Thomas. While a student at William and Mary College, Thomas heard a speech by a lawyer named Patrick Henry. His topic was the Stamp Act and the overreach of British government, and Thomas Jefferson walked away determined to do his part in championing the cause of American freedom. When he turned 21, he was elected a member of the Virginia legislature. He wrote a pamphlet addressed to the King of England entitled A Summary View of the Rights of British America, which was published in England and America. When the royal governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, read Jefferson's writings, he threatened to prosecute Thomas for high treason. Only Jefferson's supportive associates in the General Assembly kept him from carrying out his threats. When the Committee of 5 gathered for the first time, they appointed Thomas Jefferson as their chairman, even though he was the youngest on the committee, and commissioned him to write up a draft declaration. He showed it to Ben Franklin and John Adams, and they only gave it a few verbal changes. The slightly edited draft passed from the committee to the floor, where for the first time Thomas Jefferson's simple yet powerful words were read aloud to a waiting world. It seems ironic that through the years, and especially in this day and age, Thomas Jefferson's declaration has been labeled racist, that the claim is made that because some of the founding fathers owned slaves, their names should be erased from American history and their work discredited. This accusation is by no means new, nor does it go unanswered. Benjamin Franklin spoke of the attempts in America to abolish slavery, even in the years prior to the War for Independence. He wrote that a disposition to abolish slavery prevails in North America, that many of the Pennsylvanians have set their slaves at liberty, and that even the Virginia Assembly has petitioned the king for permission to make a law for preventing the importation of more into that colony. These early Americans repeatedly attempted to end slavery, but the British government thwarted their attempts. Several men wrote about the topic. Noah Webster said, "Justice and humanity require the end of slavery. Christianity commands it." Charles Carroll said, "Why keep alive the question of slavery? It is admitted by all to be a great evil." John Jay said that men should pray and fight for their own freedom and yet keep others in slavery is certainly acting a very inconsistent as well as unjust and impious part. And George Washington said, "I can only say that there is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition of slavery." The Founding Fathers did more than talk, they acted. Many of the Founding Fathers who owned slaves released them after the United States gained independence, including George Washington, Caesar Rodney, and others. Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush founded America's first anti-slavery society. There were other similar societies for ending slavery with members such as James Madison, James Monroe, John Marshall, and many more. Francis Scott Key, who authored the Star-Spangled Banner, helped found the American Colonization Society, a group that tried to end slavery by facilitating emigration for freedmen to a growing colony in Africa. Partly because of these men's efforts, many states abolished or prohibited slavery as early as 1780. Thomas Jefferson is often near the top of the list of shamed slave owners, but in fact, no one was more vehemently opposed to the evil British policy of slavery than Thomas Jefferson himself. Jefferson introduced a bill in the Virginia Assembly designed to end slavery. He described the British slave trade as cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty. One may ask, didn't Jefferson himself write the line, "All men are created equal"? Did Jefferson truly mean all? He did. John Quincy Adams explained, "The inconsistency of the institution of domestic slavery with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, was seen and lamented by all the Southern patriots of the Revolution, by no one with deeper or more unalterable conviction than by the author of the Declaration himself, Thomas Jefferson. It is because these founders planted the first seeds of black equality that slavery eventually ended in America. May we be inspired to continue the founders' bold legacy of thoughtful, principled efforts to bring about freedom and justice for all. A legacy paved by the first men in America who dared to act upon the notion that indeed all men of every skin color are created equal.
Thank you. Now we're going to put on our, going back in time a little bit, we have some letters that will be coming, right? Okay, Diane Calbro and the Historical Society are going to have some letters of the Revolution from residents here in Cheshire.
Excellent. Hello everyone, good morning. Happy 4th of July. The Cheshire Historical Society would like to thank the Bennett family for inviting us to participate in this morning's activities. We would also like to especially thank the Cheshire Horse Council for their participation in our vignette this morning, which is called Waiting for the Mail. As I begin, I want you to realize that the only way mail came, or indeed news of anything, was through horseback. And so we begin. The news of the April 19th, 1775 battle in Concord was received in New Haven 2 days later. The Lexington alarm, as it was known, created great excitement. When this news reached Wallingford, New Cheshire, and Meriden, all the male inhabitants between 16 and 50 were liable to be called into service. No men from New Cheshire served in the first call, which happened within a week of the Lexington alarm, and involved the departure of 100 men. Within the month, the second call was made by General David Wooster for the 1st Regiment of the Connecticut State, and 86 men from our area left to serve for 8 months. Some men went to Harlem. Some men went north to Lake George and further on to Canada. Some were sent to Boston. The letters you'll hear are transcribed in part from actual soldiers' letters listed in the History of Cheshire, 1694 to 1840, written by Joseph Perkins Beach. At the time these letters were written, the Connecticut troops that had been called out were of the militia companies. They were more for a show to the enemy than actual warfare, which, however, was imminent. Soldiers' life was as dangerous as being under fire. Now, our ladies who are tending to farms and doing a lot of things without their husbands, their brothers, their sons, now must fend for their own. And here today, they've heard that the rider is coming with news. And lo, there he is.
I have not much time to deliver this post. I have come from Meriden. I am on my way to Hamden and on my way to New Haven. I pray that all your menfolk are safe and sound. I have some special orders here for hand delivery. One is to go to this fine lady over here. And I'm looking for a girl named Rachel. Pass them out accordingly. I will take your letters. And deliver them along the route. I am departing for Hamden. Good day to you all.
Thank you. Ladies, I hope that you will share your letters with us. For those of you that are unable to read, which certainly was a possibility in 1775, I will read your letter for you. June, ye 1775, dear and loving wife, I would inform you that I am well through the goodness of God, as I hope these lines find you as well. I was on guard at Castle Point, where I stayed one day and almost 2 nights, having nothing but the heavens for a covering, being very muddy and wet and rained. The next day, on Saturday night, there was heavy fire from the enemy, which continued all night. I was on guard. They fired all night. The balls flied close to me and struck all around us. And then they fired no more, and they killed no man in all this last time. This night there was one of the enemy deserted in a boat and came to us. Our sentry shot at him, and shot him through his leg and brought him through. He brought a long boat, 1 wheat of sugar, and so much coffee, and we received him joyfully. There was 2 of the enemy deserted from their sentries, and came to us, which informs us that the enemy is going away. Thank you, dear mailman. Thank you very much. Good job. As a note, these are actual letters from the beach history. Letters written from Cheshire men fighting to their womenfolk at home. Ticonderoga, New York, June 19, 1775. Honored father and mother, after my duty to you and my love to my brothers and sisters is presented, I shall inform you that I am in good health, as I hope by the goodness of God these may also find you. I have the pleasure to inform you that the British, having left Ticonderoga, fled from the point also on Friday the 10th of June. Our men marched up and took possession of it. As to the affairs of the army in general, I suppose you know more about them than I do, and so I shall say no more about them. On the 11th of the previous month, I received a letter from you dated May 1st, which gave an account of the health and welfare of you, all which rejoiced me very much. But I have not received any letter from you of recent. I hope you will not fail of sending me a letter soon, as you have opportunity no more at present, so I remain your faithful son. Thank you. Good job.
Harlem, June 20th, 1775. Dear and honorable parents, I would inform you that through the goodness of God, I am well and health at present, and I hope that these lines will find you so too. But the presence of God, my brother is not well. He was taken to the hospital yesterday. He is not very bad, but he has not been well since some days. But I hope you, with the blessing of God, he will get well before long. I have nothing to write, so much as I would be glad to write. But so, for this present, will remain your loving son, anxious for. Thank you. George, June ye 1st, day 1775. Ever honored father and mother, after my duty to you and my love to my brothers and sisters is presented, I would let you know my circumstances a little. I am at present in a comfortable state of health, for which I bless God. Yesterday I arrived at this place. My journey has been long and tedious, but through ye mercy of God, I have got pretty well over it. We are encamped on ye west side of the river on the hill. The army in general is very healthy. There is a few sick with ye measles, but none with any other distemper. We have plenty of provision at present. Our allowance is just as much as we will have, and that is pretty good too. Please to give my love to my brother Ephraim and to my brother and sister Beach. No more at present. I shall only subscribe myself your dutiful and obedient son, Elnathan.
Fishkill, New York, June ye 27, 1775. Ever honored parents, I having this opportunity to write unto you do cheerfully embrace it, hoping these lines may find you in a perfect state of health, together with my brothers and sisters as well as ye rest of my friends. We marched to this spot, and ye weather being extreme hot, there was 3 died by the way, for we came about 8 miles without any stop, but through the goodness of God I held up better than I expected. I have been pretty healthy for the most part ever since I came from home, and blessed be God for the same, and I ask your prayers to God that my health be continued, and that I may be preserved from sin, and from every other evil that I am exposed to in ye camp, and cover my head in the day of battle, if called thereunto, and his own due time return me in safety. I want very much to hear from home, and should be glad if you would write to me as you have opportunity. This is the 3rd letter that I have sent to you, but I must not stay so, wishing you and all the rest of my friends well. I take liberty to subscribe myself, your dutiful son.
Thank you. Good job.
New York, June ye 28, 1775. Honored parents, after my kind regard to you, I take this opportunity to let you know that through the goodness and mercy of God, I am well and in good health. And although my body is absent from you, yet my heart is with you. And I would have you think of me and pray for me, that I may be kept from sin and from sickness and from death. And I hope that God will return me to you again in safety, laden with the goodness of God, which time I hope we shall see and rejoice together. It is a time of health in the camp, and has been all along. Mr. Smith is well and desires to be remembered to his wife. And to you all, I have nothing strange to write to you, but we expect to march from here pretty soon, and where we shall go we can't say. There is talk of going to Crown Point, and I believe we shall go there if we go anywhere from here. I would have you write me a few lines to let me know how you are. So no more at present, but I remain your dutiful and loving son, till death we part. New Haven, June 28, 1775. Dear sister, I take this opportunity to tell you that I am gaining health, and I pray that God will restore me. I hope these lines will find you well. I received your letter with the advice of our mother to try drinking of snails boiled in milk and water. I remain your loving brother. Thank you very much, and especially thank you to the readers who were reading from the beach history, which is available online as a PDF. So as you stay safe and stay home and might be being very bored, the beach history is waiting for you to read it. I want to also thank John Barry from the Cheshire Horse Council for bringing his horse out onto the green and doing such a fine job with that. Thank you very much.
I guess we're going to sing My Country Tenderly first, okay? And then the declaration. So everybody, hopefully on the back side of the Star Spangled Banner, you have My Country 'Tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, and hopefully the sound will work and everything good. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims tried, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. My native country, thee, land of the noble free, thy name I love. I love thy rocks and rills, thy woods and temple hills. My heart with rapture thrills, like that of love. Let music swell the breeze and ring from all the trees, sweet freedom song. Let mortal tongues awake, let all that breathe partake, let rocks their silence break, love sounds prolong. Our fathers, God, to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Long may our land be bright, with freedom's only light. Protect us by thy might, great God our King. Well, great singing, and you may be seated now. And now, without further ado, we have some readers of the Declaration of Independence. I'll start.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operations till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable by tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the repository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
Thank you. Section 3.
Section B. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitutions and acknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with other parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarged its boundaries, so as to render at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislators, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging our war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfectly scarcely paralleled into the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of the civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends, and bereaved them to the fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare
is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
Great.
And I thought the Pony Express rider was cute.
Yes. Yep.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince's character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them, from time to time, of attempts by the legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are dissolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved, and that, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may have right to. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
The signers of the Declaration of Independence from Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. From North Carolina, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. From South Carolina, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. From Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. From Virginia, George Wyeth, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. From Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. From Delaware, Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McKean. From New York, William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. From New Jersey, Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. From New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. From Massachusetts, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Payne, Elbridge Gerry. From Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery. From Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming to this remembrance of the Declaration of Independence and the public reading. And as John Adams, our second president, said, the 4th day of July will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival, and it ought to be commemorated as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to Almighty God. So thank you for coming. I hope you have a good rest of your wonderful day. And God bless you all, and God bless America.